We are facing a real dilemma here in California with the onslaught of these fires. These really a major crisis for the state. And in large part, it has to do with a long period of fire suppression. And that has led to this situation in which we have huge fuel loads across California that when they burn, they really explode into these major fires.
100 firefighters are battling a fast-moving brush fire along northbound Highway 4.
Cultural burning in California is a practice that has been employed for thousands of years by indigenous populations to enhance the productivity, the sustainability, and diversity of the plants and animals in their territories. Why cultural burning is so important today is that it's a really key landscape management practice that can, in many ways, not only enhance our indigenous plants and animals, which are in desperate need across the state, but also it can really be a key factor in reducing the fuel loads and hopefully minimizing these major firestorms that we are facing today in the state of California.
The term cultural burning is kind of a new terminology. We never called it that before. Today, people want to put labels on things. For the most part, cultural burning is prescribed fire. But managing wildfire is something that we've always done for thousands of years. Culture is to cultivate and, basically cultivating your traditions, your way of life, putting fire on the land, taking care of the landscape. When we burn today, we're burning to restore resources that our people harvest from, whether it's a fiber for their basketry or any of the other products they might be making, medicines that we use naturally. The idea is to rejuvenate. We're not looking to kill the root system. We want everything to grow back immediately, like 3 days, 1 week, 1 month. When we look at what makes a healthy forest, water is the most important. And when we burn, our water table comes back up. And when it's being held near the surface, then we're ensuring ourselves of a cultural livelihood and a sustainable way of life. What we're doing here on the land has got to be good long range, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 3 generations, 7 generations, for our grandchildren's grandchildren. Agencies, governmental bodies, they operate in the now, what's good right now. That's their agenda. Basically, their agenda is not for sustainability. Their agenda is to make money.
By the early 1900s, by 1920, pretty much the whole state, including the federal and state agencies, were all doing fire suppression and trying to remove fire from ecosystems statewide. Suppression was seen as the way to go, primarily for timber resources. So the idea was when people came here, early foresters, and they started to look at many conifer forests in this state, they found out really quickly that number of trees per acre was relatively low. Of course, this is because of indigenous and lightning fire for millennia, but they saw tremendous open spaces around trees. And they said, wow, what we can do is let's get more trees in these open spaces. Inevitably, we're going to grow more timber, and then we're going to have more ability to harvest this and actually build homes and do the things in California that a lot of society wanted.
You would be able to go out and find hundreds of thousands of trees all planted together, look like toothpicks in a bottle. What you're looking at is a thickness of canopy that is 80 to 90% thick. What that means is that the snow, the precipitation, the rain cannot hit the floor and cannot be absorbed by the root system and held. That's not the system, that's not the ecological system that needs to be in place. The fires that we saw this year, we're going to see them again. We're not out there on the land taking care of anything. The resources, the shrubbery and trees are dying from the drought. 150 million trees died, and they're still standing, waiting for fire.
When we see indigenous groups having their burning practices halted, it really was an awful idea. Indigenous groups were burning all over the state for millennia. They were thought of as somehow just not, scientific. This was technology that was basically rudimentary. Culture was not sophisticated, but turns out all that was wrong. Cultures have been teaching practices for millennia, teaching this from person to person, getting incredible results with stewardship, plants, animals, foods, medicines. They were dismissed completely.
It was illegal to burn, and that all came at a specific time when the U.S. Forest Service was seizing land also from indigenous people around here. And a large part of what happened also was just trying to shut down indigenous practices. Fire traditionally has also been something that's been very ceremonial. Indigenous ceremony was outlawed for so long too. It was illegal to practice indigenous religions and ceremonies. In a large way, it was illegal to be indigenous, So we've had to constantly push to not be illegal in this country.
So it's interesting to talk about colonization on fire management and practices here in California, because it's intermixed with the colonization that happened to the people and the land. When my ancestors were here for thousands and thousands of years, we had practices that we used because we were so integrated with the land. There was a reciprocity with living with the land as a relative. If you could imagine in diaries of people that had come here, written diaries about how they talked about the land when they first saw it, how it was manicured better than some of the best gardens in Europe at the time, because there was nothing underbrush, and that was intentional. It was intentionally set. And these days, in the last couple of 100 years, we've really been taught to fear fire in California, rather than to embrace it as part of our circle of creation. And as a result, everyone now living in the territories we call California are in danger because of that devastating relationship breaking.
I work also with the volunteer fire department here in Orleans, which does fire and medical. So I've been around a fair amount of folks who've lost their homes in fires. Folks have passed away even, at the scene. So I can completely understand why folks are afraid of fire. But on the flip side is that we're not showing folks prescribed fire and fire that's safe. At least around here, we are able to do prescribed burning. That's fairly large scale. If it's nighttime, the whole town can see that there's a hillside on fire. And so I think that also just burning in a good way, with prescribed fire, is also a good way to show folks that it's also okay.
The use of fire in our traditional ways is a social justice issue because our people have been disconnected and dispossessed from our land since colonization began. Our traditional lifeways have been marginalized and taken away, our languages, our songs, our ceremonies. I think that many people don't realize that most of the big institutions in the Bay Area, UC Berkeley, San Francisco State, Stanford University, Mills College, Dominican, are all built on village sites of our ancestors. These village sites that held people for thousands of years, that were buried there, that lived along these freshwater creeks, in this urban landscape, you invisibilize our people, right? It's the responsibilities of these institutions that hold thousands of our ancestral remains in boxes still, to work with the indigenous people to create a balance again, to give back land to indigenous people, to work in reciprocity with indigenous people.
I mean, just looking at it holistically too, when I look at the community, like I said, like with the houselessness, we have like a food security issue here, which like we live in such a like abundant place. But when you talk about accessibility, like if people aren't able to manage their gathering places, they're not going to have the kind of acorn crops or mushrooms, etc., berries that they need to like live off of. So it's important to allow people to burn and do management, or else they're not going to have the kind of food resources that they need to thrive on. And I think that you really see the effects on mental health around here when folks aren't able to do these things or they don't have it accessible. And then you see like people who are able to do a lot of like cultural activities, and just like how much it makes them feel more happy and fulfilled. Intergenerationally, it's nice to be able to create accessibility to places for like elders and children. So that's all an important part of like why we need to like continue to push for sovereignty and land back.
In many ways, it's the right thing to do, to work with tribes who have lived on this land forever, and to facilitate their ability to revitalize the lands that they look at as really their part of their territories. And it'll also, in many ways, minimize some of the major impacts that are taking place due to the effects of colonialism over many years, and also climate change. And I think these are all important factors that we need to think about as we move into the future here in the state of California.
There's some agencies that have, cracked the door and peeked out and let you peek in. And that's basically it at this point in time. There's nobody throwing the door open. Cal Fire, not Forest Service, not parks, not counties.
If you do any work here that's not with us, then it's continuing to take away our sovereignty. It's continuing to take from us. And I think that we need to be involved, because I think that no one really has the grasp of like the ecological functions and is as devoted to seeing them like thrive and be healthy, into the future, even as like Native people living on the land and being in their places. And I think that it needs to be done alongside what Indigenous people are doing from the beginning, from the inception, and not later at a process when a project's already been created without Indigenous consent, and also without those partners.
I feel hopeful of this time. I cannot not feel hopeful. I have grandchildren that now live in our territories, in our lands, and I believe that the leaders that we have been waiting for are here with us, that we need to work together to ensure that we can work with other agencies to acknowledge that these traditional knowledges about fire work, that there are ways of doing those kinds of things that will actually help. Will help the animals, will help the plant life, will help the waters, will help human beings. And it will stop the huge fires from happening all at once. And I think that the generosity that Indigenous people hold in their hearts for other people that come here is a way for us to show that there's a way for all of us to live in our territories, that there's a way for us to live in reciprocity and listen to one another about how it is that we're supposed to be on this land.